Hey now, I'm going to take two of my favorite things, bacon and bourbon, and I'm going to put them together to make a bacon-infused bourbon, which is really easy. These are the only two ingredients that you need, and you need very few tools. So let me show you how it's done. What I've got here is a package of, this is some of my homemade cold smoked bacon, and I'm actually going to cook up the entire package. I don't need all of this, but I am going to probably harvest the majority of the grease for this, and I'm going to need probably a couple of these bacon strips themselves to make this bacon infused bourbon. Other than that, the rest of this bacon I'm just going to save and probably use in a pizza or something like that. So I've got my oven preheated at 350 degrees. I'm going to toss this in here and let it go for 15 or 20 minutes or so, just until it's kind of nicely crispy and ready to go. All right, so this came out and it's looking delightful. I'm just going to set aside so far all of these bacon strips just until I get the grease dealt with. All right, then I'm going to try and harvest as much grease as possible off of this. So I'm just going to use my rubber scraper. And let's see how much we wound up with here. Looks like you're going to be somewhere just under 1/8 of a cup of grease off of this, which is just about perfect. All right, so I'm just taking that harvested bacon grease, getting it into here. I have a few of these strips of bacon. That's really all that I'm going to need in there. I did try to do this. I've done this a few times here, and one time I think I flew a little too close to the sun. Wound up with about 8 of these strips in here, and the result just turned out to be quite a bit saltier than I wanted. I wasn't expecting that type of extraction of the salt out of it, and it was not what I was after. So doing this, now these are shorter strips than a lot of store-cut bacon, so I mean a person could probably get away with 1 to 2 strips probably of just regular bacon. And now, time for the bourbon. I'm going to be using just like some bullet bourbon here. I'm not going for anything like super fancy or whatever, but something that just kind of works nicely in cocktails. And I'm just going to pour it on top. A person doesn't often get to pour out 3/4 of a liter of bourbon in a single sitting. There we are. I'm going to save the bottle because that's how I'm going to be packaging it up. Just sort of mix it a little bit. Then I'm going to get this covered up here with some plastic wrap, and then we'll be back. So I've got this covered up with the plastic wrap just so nothing can fall in here. I'm going to let it sit overnight, and that should be enough time just for some of that smokiness to come out of that bacon and to absorb some of those sort of umami characteristics that are coming out of it. You can see some of that bacon grease is already sort of solidifying as it cools down to room temperature. And yeah, so overnight you could probably go as little as 8 hours or so. This will probably get a little bit more time than that before we need to chill it down just to make sure we can separate all of that bacon fat out. So this rest of this bacon I'm just going to set aside, probably use this on some pizza in the next day or so. The bacon that you use for this can be pretty much anything that you like. Smoky, the smokier probably the better, because that's the main thing that we're trying to extract out of the bacon. As long as it's not like super crazy over the top. This bacon of mine is kind of like a medium smokiness, just because that's what we really like around here, and it works really nicely in this bourbon. So the next day here, I'm just going to pop this into the freezer and let it sit for several hours, basically while I'm at work. And that's just going to make sure that all that fat is truly solidified, and it'll be easy to remove, kind of that fat washing process. And then we can bottle it back, filter and bottle it back up. So after 8 hours in the freezer, I'm going to pull this out, and it's time to filter and bottle. All right, so for this fat washing and bottling process, I just need a few tools. First of all, I'm going to use a slotted spoon to dig out the larger pieces of the fat that are in there. The tongs here are just to easily pick out the bacon. I've got this metal sieve and this 1 liter liquid measure. That's for the initial straining. Once I've dealt with that, I've got some cheesecloth, and this is just like, it's probably 4 layers thick or something like that. That's for a secondary straining. Then a funnel, and of course, the bottle. One last thing is I've just got a bucket here that I'm going to be putting the fat and bacon strips into. So I'm just going to pull this out, trying to get off as much of the bourbon as possible. Oh, actually at this rate, I might not even need those tongs. Get these out like so. Save every last precious drop. And there, that'll be good enough for that initial straining. That is a very cold bowl. Committing to the pour, so as to not have it spilling down the side of the bowl. Then, just going to tap out that. I'm going to place this cheesecloth in here. And now for the final straining. This is where things feel sketchy and I get nervous. So, again, just committing to it. Here we go. Straining out any other solids that are in there. Lost a couple of drops. Pretty sad about that. That'll be okay. All right. So now, I'm just going to set this stuff into here. Might wind up with a few extra drops coming out of that, but that's totally fine. So here we are. I'm now going to just throw my cap back on it, let it warm up, and then we can have a taste. Now, one of the things you're going to notice here right off the bat is that this bourbon got a little bit hazy. That's natural for a non-chill filtered bourbon. In this case, it's more than likely because it was exposed to those freezing temperatures there for a while. That just turns the bourbon a little hazy. The same kind of thing can happen when you add ice cubes to it or if you press it or something like that. Doesn't impact the flavor whatsoever. It just takes away a bit of that crystal clear look. Either way, I think it's a totally acceptable price to pay for this. Now, as far as the actual drinking experience, smelling it, you can pick up actually kind of like a light bacon aroma, that kind of like nice, rich, fatty pork, that cured pork flavor or aroma in this case, and just kind of light smoke in addition to that initial bourbon. And in drinking it, that same those same characteristics follow through. You get that sort of bacon character, a little bit of smoke, and this sort of really kind of cool umami characteristic that I think I would credit for sort of rounding off some of those kind of rougher edges that are characteristic of bourbon. And then there's also just a little bit of saltiness in it because it pulls some of that salt out of the bacon as well. Which is why it's possible to fly too close to the sun and add too much bacon, and then it's just like a salt bomb. But this amount is absolutely perfect. It's really cool kind of on its own. Makes an amazing cocktail like my bacon and brown sugar old fashioned, or pairs really well with bacon. It's only the entire piece. Yeah, so anyway, I'm gonna have this, and you folks keep her at 11.